o'clock, so let's go ahead and call this Committee on Appointments to order. Good morning, colleagues. How are you all doing today?
Great.
First meeting of the month, and we have a number of items to approve. So let's get started with that, and then we'll go to the last item, which is to review our openings. So the first one is a resolution approving the City Commission's appointment of Tanya Bermejo to the Civil Service Board. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Support.
It's been moved and supported. Colleagues, Ms. Bermejo was most previously on our Community Relations Commission with Commissioner Perdue for a number of years. She has a healthcare background, also is also part of our Sister Cities group for Zapopan, Mexico, or Jalisco, and I think will bring some good perspective to this board. Any other comments or questions?
As someone who worked with her, I agree. I'm excited to see her be recommended for other boards since her term on CRC is up. I do have a question, though, just kind of a procedural standpoint. I see that in the agenda that it is asking for the City Commission's appointment as opposed to Mayor Bliss's appointment. So just curious about the path of that appointment versus from Mayor Bliss.
Sure. Thank you for bringing that up, and I know we talked about it, but I think it's good to bring it into the main stage. So for civil service, we try to have a balance of wards. So actually, City Clerk, if you could go down to the listing of the openings, and we can go to civil service. Yeah, it's a long ways down. So it's not the same as other boards where each commissioner has an equal, because it's 5 members versus, a different number, but we try to make sure we have a balance. So we have 1 individual from the 1st ward, we have 1 from the 2nd ward, and we have 2 from the 3rd ward. So that's something that we would look at. So it would be sort of a collective appointment, so any one of us city commissioners could make that recommendation. And then we would say, okay, well, is this in line? Do we have everybody from the 3rd ward? So then we probably wouldn't want to move somebody from the 3rd ward. We try to look for somebody from the 1st ward or the 2nd ward. In this case, this opening has been open for some time. And so we would say, okay, the City Commission would like to bring forth this person because of their past experience. So
Who initiates that when it's listed as a recommendation of the City Commission?
that would be this body. So what would happen is, as we're having this meeting, our last agenda item, we're going through these pieces. So in this meeting, you could say, hey, colleagues, there's somebody that has approached me. Now, if they're fully vetted, we might talk about them openly. Sorry, I feel like I can't see Commissioner Perdue, and then I feel bad that I'm not looking at her. So it would be in this group. It could also happen as you all are meeting individuals, and you might say to myself as the chair, hey, Commissioner Isasi, I've talked to somebody. They haven't done the PIF, but they're interested. But we typically try to reserve talking about their name until they're fully vetted, just because, again, there's some personal information, and we don't want to sort of put that out there until they resolve it. Is that fair?
Yep, that
so
makes more sense.
I will say, let me clarify that it is not one obvious path. It could be multiple paths. It could be in conjunction and recommendation with a liaison that has previously served. So as Ms. Bermejo has served on CRC, I know she shared interest in doing an initial or additional board. So then Ms. Caudle had shared, hey, she's interested. What do you all think? You've had this opening for a while. It could be any one of us. It could be one of our other colleagues. Yeah, so there is not one path, I should say. But typically that would happen here, and we could say, I see I have 1. We won't have 1 after this. We may have 1 in the future, because actually there might be a member who resigns because of residency.
Okay.
Yep.
And very similar, so I just happen to see above it is Board of Review, and Ms. Jasper's here. That's also a City Commission appointment, but that would, usually a Board of Review comes with her because she knows the people that have the expertise.
Yes.
And she'll bring so you might have a staff recommendation saying these are the people that we would like appointed to.
Yeah, especially in the case of what I'll call more deeper knowledge or industry boards where we'd want somebody with a specific understanding, certainly Board of Review, even Civil Service as well, because of some of the things that we would review there. Does that answer your question, Commissioner?
Yep, thank you.
Okay, thank you for that. Commissioner Robbins, do you have any questions on that?
Not at this time, thank you.
All right, so we have a motion on the table. We had some discussion. I am now going to call for the vote. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, that carries. Thank you so much. So that will fill our board, so yes. We'll have that one taken up. This is a resolution confirming Mayor Bliss's appointment of Nathaniel Phillips to the North Quarter Improvement Authority Board. Do you have a motion?
So move.
Second.
It's been moved and supported. Mr. Phillips is a neighbor in the North Quarter area or the Creston neighborhood area. He currently serves on the Board of Housing Appeals, and he is a business development individual with DataWise. Any questions? And this we'll do a couple here, and then we'll hopefully get to a full board for North Quarter too. All right, I'll call the question. All those in favor?
Aye.
That carries. Thank you so much. Next is a resolution confirming Mayor Bliss's appointment of Andrea Hendrick to the North Quarter Improvement Authority. Do you have a motion?
So moved.
Support.
Moved and supported, colleagues. Ms. Hendrick works to represent Knox Cannabis on the Plainfield corridor. They're a new business right there on the east side of. And so, and she has been attending the meetings and also has a very strong background in policy and has a background in planning as well. Any other questions? Okay, all those in favor?
Aye.
That carries, thank you. So the next is two resolutions confirming, well, I got to take one at a time. The number 4 is a resolution confirming Mayor Bliss's appointment of Kyle Kimball to the Board of Review.
So moved.
Support.
It's been moved and supported. Ms. Jasper, do you want to come up and say anything about these? You don't have to, but I know we just talked about that, and it might just, if you don't mind, if you could review a little bit of the Board of Review for our new colleagues as well.
Just push the button.
Good morning, I'm Paula Jasper, I'm the city assessor. And what the Board of Review does is they hear appeals of assessed value every March. It's a state requirement. And right now, we are having our assessor's review. So in order to appear before the Board of Review, a property owner would have to petition the assessor's review first as part of our city charter. And the Board of Review is a 3-panel member. It's the independent body that reviews the city's assessment to determine does it exceed 50% of true cash value. So it's another independent look to determine if the assessor has made a mistake or is assessing too high or too low. So that happens as well. They also hear appeals based on poverty. So if a property owner is in poverty, they can have their property taxes waived. It's an exemption that's good for 1 year. So the board handles that as well. They are required to have some real estate background so that they are familiar with real estate values and what's happening in the market. The two candidates are both realtors that live in the city of Grand Rapids. So we're very fortunate, and thank you, Daniel, for getting them on the agenda this morning. Thanks.
Thanks, Ms. Jasper, appreciate it. And I think that's nice to have the little background and just reminders as well. So, colleagues, any questions? All right, so all those in favor?
Aye.
That carries, thank you. You can go ahead and sit down, Paula.
Thank you.
Thanks. We won't make you stand up for the rest of it. Next is a resolution confirming Mayor Bliss's appointment of Judson Mowbray to the Board of Review. Do you have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
It's been moved and supported. Any other questions, colleagues? Okay. Hearing none, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
That carries, thank you. Next is a resolution confirming Mayor Bliss's appointment of Calvin Mills to the Community Relations Commission.
So moved.
Support.
Moved and supported. We have, as we kind of just talked about, we have 3 appointments here. We're obviously taking just the first one. I will also add, and Commissioner Perdue, please jump in as the chair of the Community Relations most recently. Ms. Caudill, who retired last week, has come to this body and shared there's an additional, there's quite a, I don't want to say quite a bit more involved, but the Community Relations takes additional steps to vet their candidates.
I can speak to that.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Yeah, so we have been glad to be able to recommend appointments to Mayor Bliss. So we look at folks who apply for the CRC. There are a few specific questions to the CRC, and then we look to say what skills and traits and leanings are already represented, who else might need to be represented. So for example, the CRC talks a lot around some of our safety and policing concerns, but we hadn't had someone who actually has served. And so one of the recommendations this morning is someone who kind of meets that criteria. So try to kind of bring a well-rounded citizen's perspective to talk about community relations. So all three of these, items 6 through 8, are folks that I had an opportunity to help discuss and before I resigned to join this body.
Great. Thank you so much for sharing that. Any other comments about this first appointment of Calvin Mills? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
That carries. Thank you. Next is a resolution confirming Mayor Bliss's appointment of Brittany Hayes to the Community Relations Commission. Do you have a motion?
So moved.
Support?
Moved and supported, colleagues. I'll call the question, I think, for the next two of these. All those in favor?
Aye.
That carries. Next is a resolution confirming Mayor Bliss's appointment of Ally Jaffrey to the Community Relations Commission.
So moved?
Support.
Moved and supported. All those in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. Nice to have a couple of those, and then we can go into the list and mark off which ones we have filled. Next is a resolution recognizing the Fire Retirement System's appointment of William Fabiano to the Police and Fire Retirement System Board of Trustees. Do you have a motion?
So moved.
Support?
Moved and supported. Is this a reappointment or a new appointment, Daniel?
This is a new appointment due to a retirement, and Mr. Fabiano was elected by the Fire Retirement System's membership.
No, thank you so much for saying that out loud. Any other questions, colleagues? All those in favor?
Aye.
That carries. Thank you. That's all of our business for today. So, in the rest of the time that we have for our meeting, we can review these openings. So, we just added 2 members for the Board of Review. Actually, can we take a step back? One of the things, and I think with new commissioners on the body, we have different perspectives and different questions. And one of the things that I'd also like to bring to this committee is on our commission meeting, which is either at a 2:00 or a 7:00. In those petitions and communications, you will see the number of people who have submitted a resignation to different bodies. And actually, this week we had a number of them. I think there was at least 4, Daniel. I don't remember.
Correct.
Okay.
There was also, unfortunately, as the nature of boards and commissions, one from the North Quarter Corridor Improvement Authority. So
Yes.
we went
I was
from a full
expecting
board
that one.
to one member.
I was expecting that one, yes. And thank you, let me say thank you, Daniel, for working with me and the mayor to get those ones advanced. And I know you're also working on another one, so that board can continue to meet. And sometimes, colleagues, that happens just as the timing, and we do have, actually, I wanted to talk about, maybe before we get into this, the timeline that we have in terms of when we need to have items in for the agenda so then they can be reviewed and then they can be subsequently published. I was thinking about as we're in our second month of commission, some of the questions that I just get used to it, but I have to make sure that I'm communicating with my new colleagues. And then I also want to include in this review of the openings to discuss any of those petitions and communications that were received, because I think sometimes that can get lost. And, ultimately, we could either wait a month for them to show, or wait a couple weeks to show up on the new agenda, or we can talk about them right now. And I think that would just help with the process perspective too. How does that sound to both of you?
Good. I also want to raise as related issue of scheduling. So we can circle back. We can start where you want to start.
Okay.
But do want to flag that.
Scheduling of, just to,
So so there was an appointment to Planning Commission and Community Relations Commission. They meet pretty much like back to back on the same days. And so wanted to make sure we have a process in place when folks are applying or looking to be appointed to more than one commission, that the scheduling doesn't conflict. So I think it's been less than 6 months, and now this person has to resign from one because
okay.
it just isn't feasible for them from a
Okay.
logistics standpoint. So just wanted to flag
Okay.
that issue, and there'll probably be another resignation coming from one of those boards, like Lee CRC, because of that. So just wanted to make sure that that's accounted for in some of our
Okay.
process.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, so Daniel, can you talk about, obviously we have business today, but then the clock starts ticking on our next meeting that we have this month, which is, February is always a little interesting because it just is
Yes.
shorter, right? So can you review for the commissioners when, usually what happens is we might talk in this meeting, we might have some conversation. Many of our appointments do need to go, they're mayoral appointments, so in between these meetings, myself and Daniel, some of you might be copied depending on, like I copied Commissioner Knight on something for the Michigan Street Corridor to move forward. It didn't quite make the cutoff for this meeting. So much of that is happening via email, but then that has to get to Daniel by a certain point, so can you share that?
Ideally, for the city manager's cabinet and agenda review, the deadline for agenda items to be submitted is the Thursday after the previous Tuesday meeting. So there is quite a bit of lead time that would need to be started before, if Thursday at noon is the cutoff for agenda items for that 21st meeting.
Yeah, thank you.
So this Thursday essentially for next?
Correct.
So I wanted to highlight that because it is a pretty tight time
It is,
frame.
yes.
We typically don't like to add things after that deadline, but in this case, there was an exception because a board was not going to be able to meet because it fell below the threshold of the number of just overall appointments versus just openings. So, and it was one that we weren't expecting until a certain point.
If we're gonna go through the timeline,
Yeah, sure.
let's get, because Patrick gave me the eye over there.
gave you
too.
the- okay.
Well, no, it's because, so it's 2 Thursdays before the commission meeting, because sometimes when we have those back-to-backs, then it really gets fun.
Yeah.
So we have,
Can I include?
yes,
We do have a calendar that we could share with all the
we
commissioners
can do
as
that too,
well.
but I'm just gonna be really quick.
But yes.
So one of the other important dates in that is so we have cabinet on Monday where we review the agenda, and then on Wednesday, the legal department goes through all the items. And so that's the next kind of like big deadline, is because then they have to do individual legal reviews outside of their team.
Yep.
And then we have agenda review on the Thursday before the meeting. That's it.
Thank you so
We
much.
do have a calendar we can share.
Yep. I think that's helpful to me because sometimes I can get just tripped up of, it's a short time frame, right? And as colleagues, as you know, we're not necessarily working on commission stuff every single day or every single night. So just trying to be mindful of those timeframes. Okay, so that was one. Can we go to our 2 p.m. meeting agenda and just discuss the openings that we'll now have due to the vacancies, or I'm sorry, due to the resignations? Thank you. And then we'll just add this as part of the final final discussion item on our agenda.
I think we could probably add those at the top of the vacancy list, couldn't we,
Okay.
Daniel? Or
That's definitely feasible.
Okay.
To
or
do
something
that.
like that, just make it part of
Just
a report.
remind it, okay.
Yeah.
The city clerk and I did meet as well because there, in the past, has been a little bit of confusion even on my end with the vacancy list and which appointments are current and which will be taken off the vacancy list at that next meeting. So what we collaborated on and thought was a good idea was to have maybe some sort of asterisk next to the appointments that would be removed at the next meeting's vacancy list.
Okay.
To say pending city commission approval, this will be removed. Some sort of boilerplate language, just to know that, okay, there will only be one CRC appointment that's vacant at the next meeting, things
Okay.
like that. If that's something that would be helpful.
Yeah, I think if that helps, I think again, much of this, colleagues, it's coming through in a personal information form. It gets put into an Excel spreadsheet. There are many manual parts to it. So, and then obviously this is a Word document that gets turned into a PDF. So it's manual as well. So any sort of denoting, I think, would be helpful. Okay, so we have Ms. Bodie, who's resigned from the North Corridor Authority. That's why we moved those ones ahead. I think after Ms. Bodie, then it's really, I think I still have two.
I believe it would just be the one.
Is it just one? Okay.
Correct.
And then we have another one in the works. So I feel, I can tell you confidently as the representative of North Quarter that we'll get those filled. So we won't fall into an issue where we don't have enough. Christopher Dolachel for Parks and Rec. I don't think we have any openings on Parks and Rec right now, so it shouldn't be, it's not going to impede a meeting, but we should think about that. And Mr. Marquardt is usually here, and we could have him talk about it, but he's not here today. But this would be an opening. I don't believe this doesn't have a residency requirement either.
Correct.
And so with the advisory boards, there's a little bit more leeway in sort of the membership. But they would work in conjunction with the Parks and Rec Department. Friends of GR Parks has a seat on that board. I think we have a GRPS representative as well on that board. So colleagues, if there's individuals that you've talked to that maybe have interest in that. Also, Daniel, could you send us the PIFs that we have right now for Parks and Rec Advisory Board? So I think that could also be another part of that process. And then the next two, so this would be two from urban agriculture. This is also Mr. Marquardt's board where he's a liaison. So if you could also send us any PIFs that you have for urban agriculture. And then colleagues, if you have other individuals that you think might be interested. I think Parks and Rec and urban agriculture are all mayoral appointments.
Correct.
That's the other cross-reference I can never remember, but I'm pretty sure they are. But again, we could have that discussion, and I don't know, certainly talk to the mayor, but share any thoughts that we have on this body.
The Parks and Recreation is actually a city commission appointment.
Okay.
And then it looks as if the urban agriculture has various appointments.
Okay,
City manager, each individual commissioner, I can provide that information
you
as
can
well.
let us know which ones those are. Okay. Thank you,
Absolutely.
Daniel. All right, so that was helpful, because there's a couple other details in that versus just the opening. All right, so we have a couple minutes, well, less than 10 minutes left, but maybe even more than that, because I got to transition too. So we just discussed the Board of Review, we discussed the Civil Service Board. I don't have any updates for these others. Daniel, I will ask about the DID, if you could go back up, City Clerk. I know these ones, we were waiting for their vetting processes. They were reappointments. Do those continue to be, are they fully vetted and they're awaiting their action, or?
I'm sorry, there are a few that are still being vetted.
Okay.
But I believe there is an appointment at the next meeting.
Okay, great, thank you. For the Civilian Appeals Board, colleagues, I think I shared in maybe the first meeting, and I've shared in other subsequent meetings, that we do have some openings here, as well as our public safety. I've talked to the mayor, she's doing interviews. They're not really interviews, but she's talking with individuals about their interests and their ability to serve. For her two appointments, Commissioner O'Connor has appointment, and then Commissioner Robbins, you have an appointment as well. I think I shared those PIFs with you, colleagues. If I haven't, or if there's any new ones, Daniel, if you could share them, but that's an important board. It's a quasi judicial board, right? I believe so. So, it's meeting depending on complaints that we receive for that body. So it's not happening as a standing meeting.
Can I ask a quick question?
Absolutely.
If something's our own appointment, does that typically denote that it's someone from our ward as well, or can it be as long as it's like a city residency role, it can be anywhere within the city?
Yeah, so there is a residency requirement. It's not a ward requirement. Actually, I don't think we have go ahead.
No, so for example, Mr. Fine was Commissioner Jones' appointment.
Oh, yes.
To Public Safety, and he was a first ward resident. So
Yeah, he's right there in the.
It's kind of right on the line.
Yeah. So Grand Rapids resident, and then, of course, it says our appointments, we advance that, and then we vote on it in our subcommittee, and then we vote on it in the larger committee, so.
Cool, thank you.
Yep. We can continue to go down. Housing appeals, we have one. We usually have one, I will say, on housing appeals. It's a pretty involved board. It does require going to different sites. I will share that we have one person for the Michigan Street Corridor that will be advanced in the next meeting. We just talked about the North Corridor. I shared colleagues with you about the Public Safety Committee. I would say this is the other priority board that I'd like to see filled here soon. I think I shared some of the PIFs that we've received thus far. I don't think we've received any other ones, Daniel. But if you have individuals that you think would like to serve, there is not a residency requirement. I would encourage for an issue with public safety, having somebody that is familiar with engaging with our public safety bodies and public safety as a whole is helpful. Southtown, I think we have somebody that we were looking at. They were still being vetted. Daniel, I know you were checking on that. You and I talked about that last week. And then I don't have anything for the Tifa or Uptown. But I will say, Daniel, could you share? So the bid has some openings. And then the Corridor Improvement Authority, so Uptown both has a bid and a SID. And it looks like we have a number of ones for the bid. Are those ones in the process of being reappointed to the body, do you know? Just sometimes when I see 3, I think that might be the case.
These were folks that decided not to renew their
Okay,
appointment.
okay. And Commissioner Purdue, you serve on the bid and the SID, correct?
For Uptown?
Yes. Okay. So maybe you and I can talk about those openings. I'm just looking at the clock. And could you send any PIFs that you have for that? Or can you check to see if we've gotten any recently, I should say. And then we talked about urban agriculture. We do have one opening from the farmer's market. We are working on some language that we need to pick up again. I'm sorry, not for that body. That's a different body. But we have talked to Mr. Marquardt. The farmer's market system was unable to identify somebody to serve, and this one is just open for this time. And I think that's about it. Commissioner Robbins, are you on the West Side Corridor? I cannot remember. Are you on South Division?
I'm on South Division.
Okay, so, but there is one opening on the west side.
Okay.
All right, I think that is all that we have time for today, colleagues. If you have additional questions, let me say I appreciate all your questions about process, thinking through this, asking really good questions as we evolve our processes as well. And thank you, Daniel, for, I know I had a lot of emails this past week.
It's okay.
All right.
Thank you.
That is all that we have for today, and we're adjourned.
good morning, everyone. We will call the fiscal committee to order here at 8:31. First item on the agenda this morning is going to be a resolution approving Grand Rapids Community College HEDA grant reimbursement for $260,763.89.
So moved.
Moved and supported. Ms. Claren, you want to?
Yeah, I guess I can pinch hit this one. This is, we get these periodically. It's simply taking the revenue sharing we get from AT&T, Comcast, and Metronet, and then we qualify for reimbursement mainly of capital equipment.
Very good. Colleagues, do you have any questions about this one? All right, hearing none. Those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Item 2 is going to be a resolution authorizing the Planning Department to approve contracts and disbursements for the neighborhood organizations in the amount of $2,500 per organization for a total not to exceed $27,500 to assist in public engagement for the community master plan.
So moved.
Second.
Moved and supported. Pretty self-explanatory. We are just going to be paying the neighborhood associations to go out and help with engagement around the master planning efforts. Any questions?
Yeah, I do have some questions on this one. So I noticed that only those who are receiving CDBG funds are on this list. So I'm curious about that decision. Is that a requirement? Is that a preference, so on and so forth?
Looks like our planning director, Ms. Turkelson, is coming up to the podium here.
Thank you. I might need a team approach this morning with community development. But so initially when the request for proposal went out and the contracts were reviewed by the consultant, we were utilizing what we call a community connector program, and that we were paying community members to do some street level engagement and advocacy. In addition to that program, community development, and I'm sorry if I don't get this technically worded correctly, community development through their CDBG funding allocated some additional monies through last fiscal year to supplement neighborhood organizations for their engagement work through the master plan process. Unfortunately, there's limitations to CDBG funding, and that limitation is that we can only pay those organizations, those select organizations, through round 3, which is important, but it doesn't get us through the final round, which is the adoption phase or the final review phase next year. In addition to those funding limitations, they cannot use those funds for things like printing, or if they have to pay for utilization of space or snacks, things like that. So this funding, this $2,500, is intended to supplement the CDBG funding to help compensate those organizations through that 4th round, and also in case there's incidental costs that cannot legally be used by CDBG funding. The fact that those 11 organizations, those organizations, 11 that are specified, are in addition to the community connectors. The reason why there's only 11 is something I would need community development to address, if that's pertinent to your question.
So I did notice that there's not a ton of representation from the southeast side of the city. And there are a number of what I would consider key organizations that are missing from this list. But I think I assume part of that is because of the limitation around CBDG, right? Who's already receiving those funds and how they can be used.
I would need Ms. Banshoff to assist me on that. But I can tell you that there is really good representation across the city, in the 3rd Ward specifically, both on the steering committee that's been appointed to guide the process, as well as the community connector program that is being operated directly by Sidewalk Detroit, but also through the consultant, the lead consultant and staff.
And this isn't the only engagement source from the neighborhood organization, right? There's plenty of other outreach that's happening from other organizations as well. This is just a supplemental to the work from Engage Detroit and other outreach efforts that are happening through other organizations.
That is correct. Aaron, did you want to?
Ms. Banshoff, do you want to weigh in at all?
The funding for the neighborhood associations is determined annually as part of our neighborhood investment plan funding process. And so those were the organizations that applied for that process and were awarded funding. And LINK does cover, for the engagement piece, a large portion of the southeast side.
Thank you.
All right. Any further questions?
Chair, I have just one comment. Ms. Turkelson, I appreciate the detail that is in the agenda item as regards to the number of meetings and the expectations. I think doing this community, I saw the large event you all had, I think that was like last week, Tuesday, where you brought in, I think there was over 50 individuals here. So I appreciate having that detail about what is expected in return for these engagement contracts. So thank you.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. No further questions? Those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Thank you. Item 3 is a resolution accepting $9,378,000 grant award and authorizing the execution of an agreement with the Michigan Strategic Fund and 7 sub-grant agreements for revitalization and placemaking grant program.
So moved.
Support.
Moved and supported. Ms. Claren or Mr. Gracia? Mr. Gracia, there he is.
Everyone's very timid to come up today.
Oh.
Man, they're putting me on the spot.
We're going to make everybody sit in the front row next week, Mr. Chair. Just putting that out there.
Good morning, everyone. Happy to be here. So what in front of you is this resolution again, which is the next step in our body of work as we applied for this MADC revitalization and placemaking grant opportunity back in June. And that process has now progressed, and we do have a grant agreement from MADC, and this is simply to authorize the receiving of those funds and then execute 7 sub-grant agreements per the MADC request in the total amounts of $9.3 million. I want to call attention that the projects themselves, we did very intentionally and strategically look at just distribution by across the city by wards, and ultimately we had to make a tough decision based on the MADC criteria of those true project-ready projects, shovel-ready as they would call them. But we believe we've done an admirable job here, and we have communicated the final award amounts to each of those sub-grantees. Unfortunately, we did receive less funding than originally applied for, but we've made adjustments and identified alternative funding sources for a few of those projects that were not be able to be included in utilizing a community revitalization program for those 2 additional projects, and 1 just stepped away just based on rising costs.
Very good. Colleagues, do you have questions for Mr. Gracia? Commissioner Sassi?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thanks for this. I just want to highlight how quickly I think that the department and you and other partners work to get this work. I think our approach as a city and working in partnership so that there weren't a lot of like this group over here and this group over there, I think it's been successful. So I just wanted to give that kudos to the department and all those that were also involved. I want to appreciate the ward specific detail and also the highlighting of the housing units and listing out the affordability. As you know, colleagues, we've received a number of questions about what are we supporting, what are we working on. This was a major effort, and appreciate the 328 that are in the category of affordable.
Yeah, thank you for the compliment, and certainly the team had to mobilize very quickly. But nonetheless, what I would also point out, as we talked about in our previous presentation, is the support of our development programs and related to the LIHTC support is vitally important to making those truly less than 60% AMI. Without those LIHTC credits, many of these projects will not probably proceed. But we know the importance of that and matching it and leveraging it with our additional funding programs.
Good. Additional questions? I think it's just also important to point out, again, this is part of that, capital stack we continue to talk about, that it's not, no one incentive or one funding stream makes a project go round, that it takes a bunch of layers of a cake to make it all come together. And so this, this $9 million in grant money is part of that capital stack that's going to create, over $130 million worth of investment in our community and add over 360 housing units to Grand Rapids, which is, part of the continued need we continue to talk about of the shortage of number of units we have available for folks and the ongoing, supply and demand that we're just not, the supply is not keeping up with demand. So this is a huge step to put 7 projects in the ground yet this year. All right, those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Thank you, sir. Item 4, ordinance amending section 4.2 of ordinance 2022-33, new classification, emergency management specialist.
So moved.
Support.
Moved and supported. Good morning.
Good morning. My name is Michelle Eddy, the Assistant HR Director. So this position, the Emergency Management Specialist, is a new classification that we're looking to add to the salary schedule. This grant-funded position will be a full-time role that will focus on the development and the facilitation of training curriculum, along with community engagement. This position will fall under the Grand Rapids Fire Department within the Emergency Management Division. And then this classification was recently reviewed and approved by the Civil Service Board on January 24th of '23.
Very good. Colleagues, any questions? All right, hearing none, those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Item 5 is going to be our bid list resolution for February 7, 2023.
So moved. Support.
Moved and supported. We have just 3 items on the bid list this morning. Any questions, colleagues? All right. Hearing none, those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Item 6 will be our warrant report, January 11, 2023 through January 24, 2023. Mr. Comptroller, good morning, sir.
Hey, good morning, Commissioners. For the period of time referenced for our warrant report this morning, the city released cash payments totaling approximately $21.6 million, which includes approximately $5.6 million for our employee payroll expense and $58,657 for income tax warrants. In terms of quantity, we issued 415 income tax refunds and 1,030 checks and electronic payments. And as always, the details and tables on the following pages list out all of those, both checks and electronic payments that were greater than $20,000.
Very good. Colleagues, any questions for the Comptroller? All right, with that, that report will be received and filed. And we'll move on to item 7, our Treasurer's Report for the period January 11, 2023 through January 20, 2023. Mr. Treasurer, good morning, sir.
Good morning, Commissioners. With our report today, we're trying to show you a couple of different graphs here, and really it's to show you one. The first one is the Weekly Economic Index, which is actually a grouping of 10 major different measures that the Fed looks at. And what it's doing is showing you that since about July of 2021, we're seeing the slowing of the economy. So as we're continuing to hear the numbers and the Fed interest rate keeps going up, and we hear the housing is slowing down and production might be slowing down, we're seeing some layoffs now in the industry. We're starting to see that come down, and that's what the Fed is wanting to do. They were wanting to cool off the economy and bring it back in line so that we're not having as much of an impact of inflation and try to rein that in. And so right now they're still planning to have 2 more rate increases. Really, when we're looking at it March, another 25 basis points is actually targeted, about a 96% likelihood that will happen. And then again in May, another 25 basis points. That's about a 67%. But when we're talking about May, we're still talking about, roughly 3 months out, and that's a really long time in terms of the economy, in terms of when things can happen, when things that could negatively impact our economy, when something could happen in the stock market, or something could happen where we're laying off more people, or there's even more global instability. Those are the things that are going to change that perspective. But in all likelihood right now, we're still looking at the very good chance we're going to see another 50 basis points added to the interest rates before they might level off and start even considering cooling it off. One of the biggest things that really impacted their view negatively was last week Friday having 517,000 new jobs out there, because that is not coming into a slowing of the economy, and that really is one of the things that they were hoping was going to start to slow down also. With the second graph, and that's actually the yield curve, and what we're showing, I want to point out, is that from years 4 through year 30, the market participants actually that are looking at it are saying that's more what we think is going to be there longer term. So they are also seeing an end to the inflation, or closing it down or bringing it down, and those high rates that we're getting right now are going to eventually go away. And then hopefully we're going to be into a more normalized yield curve where you see a lower interest rate in years 1, 2, 3, and up and curve out to a higher yield as you go out 30 years, because that's what you're expecting with the money. If I'm going to invest my money for 30 years, I'm going to be expecting a certain return greater than a 5-year investment. With our report also, we're showing that we have $543 million of reserve funds and operational funds, but we're earning 2.27% on that money right now. As we approach budget season, I think one of the things that CFO Molly Claren and I and others talk about are when new projects come up, when we start talking about bonding for projects, one of the challenges I have, or one of the questions I ask is, can we use some of this $543 million as opposed to go out and issuing more debt? Because a lot of times you're going to issue more debt at a higher interest rate than what we're earning on the funds that we're holding. And so that's that delicate balance that we try to play is, what's the best mode of operation going forward for these projects? Some of them, when they come into the water department and others that are revenue generating or enterprise funds, it's tied to their revenues. And so we're not going to use these funds. But are there other funds, street lighting or something else, that maybe we could find a way to use some of this money to fund those projects as opposed to issuing new debt? So that's the delicate balance I think we go into with the budget season. And when we're looking at what are those projects we want to complete in the next year or two, and also realize that we still have ARPA funds that are in there as well, and we'll be spending some of those down also. We have to commit it by the end of next year, fully spent by the end of 2025. So that will also pull some of the funds down there. Because I think, if I remember right, what is it, 40 to 45, 50 million we still have left in ARPA that hasn't been committed?
That might be what's not been obligated yet,
Okay.
but in my update on the 21st or 20, yeah, I'll be reporting on that. But per our Treasury filing, we have declared or actually expended through December 31st about 20 million of
Okay.
92.
So that's the delicate balance that Treasury plays with fiscal services as we look to get those monies spent down. We're also investing those ARPA dollars to earn the best interest rate we can right now until you spend those funds. So, really, it's that delicate balance right now is what is really the dollar amount we want to hold in reserve, and what is the dollar amount we want to actually apply to projects we have going on or upcoming. And so that's what we look at. You can have a lot of money in your savings account, but if you're just leaving it in your savings account and using your credit card, there's that balance.
All right, very good. Colleagues, any questions for the treasurer? All right, hearing none, that report will be received and filed. And with that, we will conclude our fiscal committee at 8:48. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. It is approximately 9:15, time for the Community Development Committee meeting to start. On last Tuesday, Mr. Hundort asked me not to be so somber, so this morning I woke up with the City Commission on my mind. So. First on our agenda is a resolution scheduling a public hearing for February 21, 2023, to consider the commemorative destination of 33rd Street from Eastern Avenue to 1,317 feet east of Eastern Avenue as a Bishop Dennis McMurray Way. I think it's important that we truly consider this as a understatement in my part that this is a dynamic thing to have happen. At this point in time, I'm going to ask my committee if they will give me a support. It's been moved and supported. At this point in time, I want to just say that McMurray family is in the audience. It is an honor to be able to honor your father and the work that he has done throughout this city. He's an outstanding man of faith, a man of God. It reminds me of the pioneer of Bishop William C. Abney when we did the same thing for him years ago. I am honored to sit here at this point in time to see that this does take place. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Second on our agenda is a resolution approving a fireworks discharge permit to Strictly FX LLC for interior special effects at the Van Andel Arena in connection with the WWE event on February 27, 2023.
So moved. Support.
Go right ahead, sir.
Morning. Yeah, it's WWE, so that's the packet of what they would think they might possibly maybe do. So, yeah, we'll be looking at it closely when they get here because they have quite a lot of flames for this one. So I think they're trying to regain attention, but that's all right. We'll keep it safe.
Colleagues? All in favor?
Aye.
Next on our agenda is a resolution scheduling a public hearing on February 21, 2023 for commitment on proposed site improvement at Highland Park for submission of a $300,000 Michigan Natural Resource Trust Fund grant application with a total project cost estimated at $629,500. Mr. Marquardt. Did I say your name right? Oh.
So moved.
Support. You know, we're going to get this together
We sure are.
pretty soon, you know. You think being here 4 years, I would have it, but, you know, when you get in this position, your mindset changes for a minute.
That's all right.
But I'm ready.
Good morning, Commissioners. This public hearing is for a grant application to the State of Michigan Department of Natural Resources for $300,000 for improvements specifically at Highland Park. The grant request would cover expenses for a new accessible restroom facility that we intend to build up there, in addition to building some new pathways, some bench seating, and other new park amenities. As a reminder, these grants are due on April 1st of every year, and it takes the state of Michigan through the better part of the year, and we hear back from the board on their decisions by December of 2023. So a little bit of a wait time there, but these are important dollars that we've been able to leverage over the years, allowing us to go so much further with our millage investments.
Colleagues.
What covers that remaining 329?
Yeah, good question, Commissioner. The remaining balance is then covered by the Parks millage funding, which has been approved by the Park Advisory Board.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Next on our resolution is, number 4 is a resolution awarding a contract with Lodestar Construction, Inc. for trench repairs over water and sewer lines, curb repairs, parking lot repairs, and traffic calming at various locations. Contract 2023-1 in the amount of $825,567 with a total amount not to exceed $985,000.
So moved.
Good morning, Commissioners.
Morning, Mr. Burke.
So the Public Works Department, first of all, performs a majority of the trench repair that occurs or needs to happen in city limits. But we utilize this contract to make repairs over water and sewer utility trenches along MDOT trunk lines and in our utility customer communities, so outside the city limits. We also utilize this contract for things like curb repair work, specialty repairs like when brick pavement is impacted, and for the installation of traffic calming features that we work with Mobile GR on. Received 2 bids on January 17th, and these bids are based on estimated quantities. So we take a look at what we typically see in a given year, put together a unit price-based bid, and that's what the evaluation is done on. So the Lodestar submitted the low bid in that amount of $825,567, which was under our estimate of $857,000. And Lodestar will be utilizing a 16% micro-local business participation rate on the work that is to be done. The contract's for a 1-year period, but it does reserve the right at the city's option to extend for up to 2 years if the city chooses to do so. There is an escalator built in of a 7.5% increase per year as stipulated in the bid, but we would come back to you next year with that request if it's prudent to do so. So costs will be charged to the appropriate department budgets as these repairs are required, and asking for your approval of this award to Lodestar, putting the contract in place with that total authorized not to exceed amount of $985,000.
Now, it's good to know that it's going to be 16.2% for the macro loans for the businesses. Will they be subcontracting out to a number of different contractors, or just, can you tell me how many, or do you know?
Yes, so the sub that they listed to receive the micro-local percentage discount in their bid was Duran, and Duran does concrete work. So that amount equates to about $134,000 worth of the estimated work would go to Duran. They may utilize other subs, but that was the only MLBE that was listed.
Okay. Colleagues, any questions?
I do have one quick question. Could you just shed some light on the types of traffic calming measures or procedures that'll be funding?
Yeah, so traffic calming measures are typically, isolated, small locations that require a lot of, handwork or unique work. And I think we install speed tables or speed humps, so things that are generally smaller in nature. But I'll ask Mr. Nairmore to weigh in on any others.
Those have historically been the majority of them, but we're also now looking at doing traffic circles and chicanes and other types of, diversion on these local streets.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Yep.
Commissioner?
Just going back, and maybe I missed it, so you talked about the MLBEs that they were using, and they only found one that met the needs that they had?
That's the one that they listed. Again, they'll perform a majority of the work themselves, but when it comes to concrete work, they listed Duran as the subcontractor that they would utilize for that portion of the work.
Okay, thank you.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Number 5 is a resolution awarding a contract with Dave Cole Decorators, Inc. for City Hall interior stairwall painting and wayfinding improvements in the amount of $74,470, with the total amount not to exceed $616,000.
So moved.
Support.
Good.
So this project includes repainting of the north and south stairwells of City Hall, including painting all walls, stairs, railings, conduits, and the ceilings. And also, as part of the project, looking to improve wayfinding and identification in the stairwells, to have an oversized floor name and number on each landing, noting which stairwell location, and each stairwell would have its own unique color. So, for instance, in an emergency, someone could say, I'm in the blue stairwell, or they may not know whether it's north or south. And so we received 3 bids on January 12th. Dave Cole submitted that low bid of $74,470 under the estimate of $150,000 for the project. So asking for your approval of the award to Dave Cole with a total not to exceed $116,000, and financing for that work will come from the Facilities Management Fund.
I'm glad that this project was upgraded to paint everything.
Yeah.
Who picks out the colors?
The project team works on that, not I. So
Can you make one wall purple?
I can ask about that.
All right, good. Yeah, if you make it purple and then make the stairwell gold, I'm good.
Okay.
Make that the safe place.
The safe place.
Not be in agreement with that.
Colleague, any questions? Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Last and not least is a resolution scheduling a public hearing for February 21, 23 to consider a revised brownfield planned amendment for the Talbot Quimbley LLC redevelopment project at 220 Quimbley Street Northeast.
So moved.
Support.
So this resolution, again, setting this public hearing for February 21st, 7 PM, for this project located at 220 Quimby Street Northeast, for a new construction of a new 43,000 square foot, 4-story residential building and a small commercial space on the ground floor. In total, residential units are at 72, including ground floor units and 1,000 square foot of commercial space. Total construction, total investment is about $13.2 million, and hard construction of $9.7. Again, the developer is requesting reimbursement of approximately $648,000 over a 9-year period for environmental assessments, due care, demolition, and site preparation. And it's a vacant site, so utilizing a vacant site in infill development. And the project has also, the developer is also committing to 10% utilization, or approximately $968,000 of the overall project costs. And the project itself has received approval from the Planning Commission and received a parking waiver for it at that Planning Commission meeting, and has also received a letter of support from the Creston Neighborhood Association.
Colleagues, any questions? All in favor?
Aye.
Ayes have it. At this point in time, it's approximately 9:27 a.m. This will conclude the Community Development Committee meeting. Was a little more up?
We're getting there.
Okay, all right. This concludes our meeting for this morning. Have a great day.
right, good morning, everyone, and welcome to our City Commission meeting today, this lovely February 7th. We'll get started today. So Commissioners, we have 3 action items before us today, and then we have 2 presentations. We have a presentation on the Economic Development Department's 2022 Annual Report. We have an update on our community master plan. We have some community engagement sessions coming up, so we are eager to hear an update about that and kick off with our consultants, the really important work that's before us as we update the master plan. And then Commissioners, directly after our Committee of the Whole meeting, we will go into executive session. We have 3 legal opinions to discuss. And then we have, back in this room, those of you who serve on the Public Safety Committee, that's at 12:30, and then we're back in here all together today at 2 p.m. So with that, we'll get started. And probably before I go to the briefings, I'll ask for a motion to go into executive session, just so we have that out of the way. And City Attorney, we're in Law Library? Yes. Okay. All right, so with that, let's start with the first one. This is a resolution adopting an amended City Commission Policy 1100-05 to recognize the annual Cesar Chavez Social Justice March as a city-sponsored event. Can I get a motion?
Moved.
Support. All right, moved and supported. Ms. Pittman, you want to tell us about this?
Good morning.
Good morning.
The Cesar E. Chavez Social Justice March event is an annual community celebration committed to equity, equality, inclusion, and preserving history and culture by the intentional action of connecting the past and present generations to continue to push forward for justice. Through the act of providing city sponsorship for the Cesar E. Chavez Social Justice March, we will help sustain the legacy and teachings of Mr. Chavez's values and principles of nonviolence for generations to come. This motion is being put forth with the support of the Committee to Honor Cesar E. Chavez.
Great, thank you. Commissioners, any questions or comments? I know we're all familiar with this important event. All right, I'll call the question. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? It carries. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, next we have a resolution scheduling a public hearing for February 21st and authorizing publication of a proposed amendment to Chapter 140 of Title 8 of the City Code, which is our property maintenance code. Can I get a motion?
So moved.
Support.
All right, moved and supported. So Commissioners, this is coming back before us after our discussion at one of our prior meetings where we gave some input and direction to city staff. So we have Ms. Bohach here to tell us about this item. And again, this is to schedule the public hearing. So we are not voting to affirm this code, this ordinance yet today. It's really just to set the public hearing so that we can hear more from our community. Ms. Bohach?
Yes, so we've been asked to provide an overview of the proposed amendments to the Property Maintenance Code, and there are 3 primary components to the changes. The most significant, though, is that of adding a chapter to address lead-based paint and require lead dust sampling in pre-1978 rental housing. And just to give a little background of how we got here and what we've done as we've been moving this forward. Reducing childhood lead poisoning has been a priority of the city for many years. It's been included in strategic plans, on legislative agendas, and identified as a program operational priority since 2004 in community development. The mayor appointed an advisory committee that worked for more than 2 years to develop recommendations to further advance this work. Conducting lead-based paint inspections to the residential rental certification program was one of these recommendations. Staff was directed to come up with a proposal on how to approach implementation of that recommendation. And as we were working on this, it required a lot of I'd say a lot of research, a lot of interaction with the state, and then we finally were able to bring it forward to you. But in the interim, we brought to you very high level concepts over several presentations throughout maybe through strategic plan updates and budget workshops, things of that nature, where it was very high level. Really got into the details, though, of how what our proposal was. Most recently and brought that to the City Commission on November 10th, and then again on January 24th. We did some community engagement, community information sessions that were held on January 4th and 5th that primarily focused on the lead-based paint screening requirements. We also held a session with representatives of the Rental Property Owners Association, which focused on the lead part of this as well as other components of the Property Maintenance Code amendments. And then there was also some meetings that were held with the Parents of Healthy Homes and the Community Collaborative on Climate Change. In addition to that, we have been partnering with the EPA to provide renovation, repair, and painting program training and certifications. We've hosted 4 of those have been hosted in our community with 100 participants, and there's another one scheduled for February 19th. So as the mayor indicated, what today's agenda item is about and what it does and what it doesn't do. First, it really makes public the proposed language that would be amended in the Property Maintenance Code. So in the public agenda, there is a tracked changes and a clean copy version of the full ordinance, and then a summary of those changes. Your action today would schedule a public hearing for February 21st at 7 p.m. to obtain comments on those proposed changes, and it authorizes the city clerk to publish that information. It does not seek approval of the ordinance, and it does not even establish a date to consider adoption. That will be something that you do at a later date. So just to make sure everyone understands, our Property Maintenance Code uses the 2012 International Property Maintenance Code as its base. So that is the starting point of our code. And what you see is our local portion of that code. The International Code Council is who prepares the IPMC and updates it and publishes it. It's copyrighted. It has to be purchased. So that's the base of the code. And then our local amendments is attached to that. So what's proposed to change, we've sort of structured here in 3 components. As we went through this process and we were asked to develop a lead inspection part of our code, it only made sense to look at our whole code and look at a comparison between the 2012 and the 2021 version. And what's proposed is that we actually update our base code to the 2021 version so that we have the most up-to-date code. And then we are identifying local amendments to our IPMC, to the IPMC through the Property Maintenance Code. And then, of course, the addition of Chapter 12, lead-based paint. The IPMC itself, compared from 2012 to 2021, while if you were to look at it, it would look to be very significant in changes, but there's a lot of just cleanup in terms of language and clarification, some additional definitions, as well as introductory language to chapters. So that's really not things that affect our code currently. There is significant additions to fire safety and protection systems that are identified in the new version of the IPMC, as well as specifically indicating that space heaters are not allowed as to meet heating requirements in properties. That wasn't there before, and the addition of carbon monoxide alarms. Another significant change is that it takes the means of appeal and removes it from a chapter in the code to an appendix, which means it's no longer part of the code. All of these things, that portion will not really impact our code because we have our own housing appeals board and process for that complies with, and it does comply with the IPMC's version. But again, this is not in code now, it's actually an appendix. So to get to our local amendments to the IPMC, the changes are basic. Some of them are very basic, which are just section numbers that change to make sure that it follows the convention of the IPMC. So if you're looking from one to the other, that you can understand it. We insert information that's required for our local program. An example of that is that we have to identify who's responsible for implementation and administration of the code. So for example, we would say that that's the code compliance department and that there's a designated code official. An item that we have identified for our local code to be included is that we actually set work hours for condemned properties between 7 a.m. and 7 p.m. That's to ensure that they are not occupied in the meantime, so they actually are vacant. We omit sections that duplicate existing codes. Those would be our nuisance codes, those that pertain to house numbering, and our fire safety. So while the IPMC's new version has a lot of fire safety code in it, we revert to our local code. There is a section in our code that that identifies the certificate of compliance for our rental certification program. Currently, you can receive 2, 4, or 6 years durations for those certificates. The single-family component of that only allows for 4 and 6 year certifications. Insertion would be to permit for 2, 4, and 6 year certifications for single family, which in essence means for any property that's a rental property that it's consistent, so you can obtain a 2, 4, or 6 year certification. And while it's appears clear to us in the language that a 6-year certificate cannot be obtained if the previous certification was 2 years. So you would have had to have had a 4-year before you can get a 6-year. There seems to often be challenges to that notion. So just specifying it in code that that's the case to make it more clear. And there's currently a limit for transferring a certificate of compliance that is 90 days. So if you have had an inspection, obtained your certificate of compliance, and then went to sell your property, if I had say a 2 or 4 year certification currently, or whatever that duration is, you can transfer that, and if I sell it to someone else, they can obtain that certificate as long as it occurred within 90 days. So and this is proposing that it be changed to 1 year. So you'd have 1 year to be able to transfer your property. There's a mechanical system inspection language in our code, and we would like to have that just align with the duration of the certificate rather than every 4 years. So right now, you're required to have it inspected at least every 4 years. If you have a 6-year or a 2-year cert, that can cause you some difficulties in terms of scheduling and keeping track of that, and it creates extra inspections. So the concept here is just to make it align with whatever the duration of the cert would be. There is some language in the IPMC for enforcement for occupiable workspaces. We do not enforce occupiable workspaces. We don't really regulate that, and this is really just about the temperature in those spaces, and so we would omit that from within our local code. And then there's a section for, we would suggest removing residential from sections that address abandoned or vacant structures. This would allow us to, right now we have 2 codes, the property maintenance code and a building maintenance code. By doing this would allow us to eliminate the use of the building maintenance code, so we would no longer need that. And it would also allow us to include commercial structures in our blight program, and that would provide us the flexibility to work with property owners toward those repairs. Right now, there's very stringent timelines in terms of getting into compliance with the building maintenance code, and also it only allows for us to issue, when we do enforcement, misdemeanor warrants. This would allow us to do it similar to what we do with abandoned and vacant residential structures. So we have the ability to work with the property owner, and also if there's not enforcement, if enforcement is needed, it allows us to issue civil infractions rather than going to that more stringent step of a misdemeanor warrant. And then we have, of course, the adding of Chapter 12, the lead-based paint, and Paul Hahn, our lead program specialist, will walk through those very quickly with you in terms of each of the sections in that code.
Great, thank you. Welcome, Mr. Hahn.
Good morning. Thank you for the opportunity, Mayor, Commissioners, and City Manager. So Chapter 12, we've talked about this recently, so I'm going to be fairly brief today, but just to give a high-level recap, This chapter is being introduced really to ensure that there's ongoing maintenance between certifications. I mean, it's a 6-year period, so this would encourage maintenance on an ongoing basis during the interim, and it would also encourage the use of lead-safe work practices. The way lead gets into a rental unit, into the environment, is by the deterioration of that paint and or the disturbance of that paint. And so it's an attempt to encourage the maintenance over time and the use of lead-safe work practices. If those are done, little lead gets into the environment. And our focus is on the interior. So as we move forward with the introduction of this new chapter, we bring down 3 items that are in our current code. Those have to do with deteriorating paint, soil, no bare soil around perimeter of older buildings, and no paint chips. There are 2 new requirements. If there is a visual inspection conducted and violations are found, peeling paint is found, there are requirements for clearance at that point in time. And then secondly, there is a requirement to conduct a dust screening activity that would catch what the eyes don't see. A corollary to this might be our mechanical safety inspections. When those are conducted, we're looking for carbon monoxide. You can't see that carbon monoxide is in the environment. You can't taste it or smell it. So we use instrumentation to make sure that that piece that visually could not be seen by an inspector is not a hazard to the tenants. And so the same type of rationale is being utilized here for dust. And then we fix the remedy for the violations. The fix is to either achieve clearance or to prove that there's no lead-based paint utilizing a state-certified inspector. So there are 2 ways that this goes. We talked about these. One is the screening. That is for units that are in compliance with the visual standard. That happens in the vast majority of cases. That would be done by a third party. We are suggesting that 4 rooms be sampled, 2 samples in each room, 1 floor, 1 windowsill. Our recommendation is 90 days prior to recertification so that that information is current. It's not a year, 2 years, 3 years old. And that we would use standards that are consistent with the EPA's lead dust hazard standard. Most importantly, because that is a standard that is both science-based, but also is looking at a tolerance because of what is needed for the renovation, repair, and rental property industry. If the property does fail the visual inspection, which we expect would be the case in a slim minority of the inspections, we are going to also request that we watch for dust to ensure that repairs made are made with safe work practices. And so we would require a state-certified clearance. It would have to be done before the property is certified, and it would clear that location. And I'm sorry, I did not advance the slide, so I just hit those 2 all in one breath. Next, we would coordinate with state and federal rules. That's what 1207 speaks to. The federal and the state have things to say about lead, and we would align with them. We would make exemptions to this program for certain properties. Owner-occupied properties would be exempt because they are not part of the rental certification. We would exempt senior housing because of the lack of presence of children for whom this is the greatest risk. And we would exempt short-term rentals such as hotels because, again, it's exposure over time that is really the greatest risk for children. And then occupant protection would be as written on the slide there, things such as not entering the work site, having daily access to facilities, and then their belongings being protected from security and from dust. Lastly, we would coordinate with local public health. We would, if they were doing an investigation, we would consider some of the findings of that investigation with an emphasis mainly on those dust samples that we reference in our code and the standards that we set in our code. They do have a different set of standards. We would be looking for the things that are consistent with our code in an effort to collaborate with local public health, Kent County Health Department. Then lastly, you've seen this flow chart. This is kind of how things operate. That we are recommending so that all properties have the value of the safety of that lead dust sampling. Because again, this is when the advisory asked for this work. One of the things the advisory was keying in on was the visual inspection that's currently in our code. Does a lot of really, really good things, but it falls short of the kind of safety that we might desire. And so the dust sampling would seek to capture those things that the eyes don't see. And it would be used to not as a gotcha, but really as a effort to ensure lead-safe work practices are being followed, and that in the interim, between the period of inspection, that properties are being maintained. Again, paint only gets into these properties through lead only gets into these properties through the disturbing of lead-based paint and through the use of unsafe work practices and/or from neglected maintenance. That's how the paint deteriorates and becomes accessible to children. So I will close with that.
All right, thank you. Ms. Bohatch, any final comments before I open it up for questions?
Yes, so again, so the next steps really are to hold the public hearing so we can obtain feedback, and then final review and discussion by the City Commission prior to consideration for adoption. After today, we'll go back and continue to work on things. We owe you some responses to some questions, and so we'll take those responses along with anything that we need to respond to yet today, and get packaged up for you and be able to move forward.
Great, thank you. All right, I appreciate that. I'm glad to see this come forward. Commissioners, any questions or comments? Commissioner O'Connor?
Thank you, Mayor. So the introduction of the update from the 2012 to 21 Property Maintenance Code, it's the first I've heard of that, so that's something new that we're going to be talking about that hasn't been brought up until we suddenly are scheduling a public hearing, so I'm a little frustrated that I didn't know that was coming down the pipe. I get that we want to update codes, and we do that with all our building codes, mechanical codes, but I guess from a practicality standpoint, there's a few high-level things here, but I really want to know a little better about when a property is being inspected by one of our code enforcement staff for rental property, what are the things that they're going to be looking for that are different in the 2021 code than the 2012 code? And very specifically what they're going to be. I mean, they know that when they go to a property, they have a checklist, they have certain things they're looking for. So I just want to know what in real terms, as someone that has interacted with code enforcement staff before, what is the practical application of the updated code? I think that's.
Yeah, and can you make sure all of us get a copy of the track changes that include all of those?
It was in the agenda packet.
Yeah, I know, but maybe just make sure that
Sure,
it's.
if you'd like it to be sent to you directly, that's fine. Commissioner O'Connor, actually, I did indicate on several occasions that we were looking at the new version of the IPMC. It was not presented identified in the presentations because the focus was on lead, but it was highlighted in those presentations. And in fact, I think even in the work session, a recent work session. So I apologize if that was not clear to you, but it has been notified, not the specific changes side by side, but that we're looking at that. And I don't know if do you want those responses right now, or do you want them in?
You're just publishing a hearing.
Okay. Yeah.
I don't need to digest everything right now.
Okay, thank you.
Probably not for.
Yeah, and maybe just add that to the list of, I know there were some questions last time as well, and then as you have that information, if you can send it to the full commission, I think that'd be helpful.
Thank you.
Yeah. Other questions and comments? Commissioner Moody and then Commissioner Knight?
Yeah, thank you, Ms. Bohatch and Mr. Hahn for this report. What I'm concerned about is the removal of residents and rental properties. If there is found to be any dust or lead paint in homes, will the owner of the rental property remove the residents from the home? And will the residents, once the work is done, will they be able to get back into the home? And will they provide some kind of financial assistance while they're out of the home?
So there's a lot of questions there. First and foremost, it really depends on what the level of work is being done. And I think we talked about that last time in terms of, if it is something that is, painting of surfaces that a room can be contained, as I think it was identified in this, is that you have to be able to have access to certain components of your living environment, the kitchen, the bathroom, for a period of time. So it really depends on the level of work that's being done. And in some cases, there will be the requirement that someone has to leave the unit for the work to be completed. Our code does not specify or identify how that happens or who pays for that. But I think the assumption can be made if you're a property owner and it's your property that you would be responsible for that.
Yeah, thank you. What I don't want to see happen is the property owner get to the point whereas he or she have to redo their whole apartment, but then you displace a family with a high rate of rent going on in our society right now. It's difficult for people to find housing, that someone will be left out because of this type of program that's coming into play. I'm just concerned that is there a way that they can still maintain their standard of living and get the work done without being displaced? And I want to make sure that the homeowner, not the homeowner, but the renter knows that there are implications to this type of situation when it comes to doing dust and when it comes to the lead paint.
Yeah, that's a great question, Commissioner, and Connie, correct me if I'm wrong. Hopefully the level of renovations aren't great, and the family would be able to stay while the repairs are being done. But if it is required for a larger scale, full remediation, my understanding is typically that takes a couple weeks, and the temporary housing is typically in like a residence inn or a hotel that has access to a kitchen and a bathroom. But typically, it's not for a long period of time that a family would have to be out of the home during those repairs. Am I correct or am I wrong?
In our city program.
Right.
In our city program.
In our city program, it's typically 1 week. And for rental properties that are participating in our program, but this is specific to the city's program, relocation is paid for as part of that program.
That's what I want to hear.
Yeah.
But
not for the mayor.
But this is broader, so our program is not necessarily just attached to this ordinance. The ordinance would stand alone.
With that said, we would be working with property owners where they did need potential support for remediation. I mean, we already do that to a large extent.
Yes, we do, and we do have a new application going forward. It's due on March 14th, and where we will be working to do more rental properties in our new round of funding that we would anticipate and hopefully be successful in receiving. We've received those funds since 2004. So not to be overly confident, but we think we have a good track record to be able to obtain those resources.
Great. City Manager, I know we've talked about this as well.
Lead hazard control program.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Mr. Bohatch and Mr. Hahn, for the work that bringing forth this item. I do want to remind the commission, when we had the briefing last week, I raised as a concern the implementation of the code fully citywide to make sure that we address both intended and unintended consequences around displacement, maybe piloting a program so we would know all of the implications as we've discussed. It was clear to me from the dais that was not the desire. As part of the ordinance, bring it forward. And so we brought those issues forward. Now, all of the other potential programming issues to help with displacement or help with cleaning, those are future program issues that we can consider as part of the budget process. And so, again, my concern is implementing an ordinance without known intended and unintended consequences. So we can have the public hearing, but if there's any reluctancy about the impact, my direction to staff would not bring the actual item back immediately until we work through some of those concerns.
Yeah. And I think that is the conversation we should be having as part of the budget process if we move forward with this, is how do we make sure that we have resources available to support any families that need assistance if there is some displacement during remediation. Commissioner?
I think so. To go back on what City Manager just said, I think we need to step back a little bit, even though I absolutely want us to be able to protect our children, because at the end of the day, that's what it's about, our kids being protected. But there are a lot of questions that literally even myself sitting here, I could probably go through them and it still would be too much and not be able to be answered today. But that's one of the main questions. But then there's a whole lot of other questions that come about. Like, do we actually have any idea what it's going to cost to do that? Like, have we had a sample home on what it would cost if a full remediation had to happen, if a partial had to happen, right? What that's actually going to cost the property owners, right? Because we have to look at both sides, right? And there's got to be a good balance in between there that's protecting the residents that are living in these spaces and protecting and helping these homeowners as well. Because that's added cost, right? So some of the questions that came to me is, who does the visual inspection, right? And who says that that person that goes in to do a visual inspection is not visually inspecting based on their own beliefs or how they were raised? And so you go into a messy house and you just say, okay, well, this needs to be fixed because the house is messy, right? What is the actual procedure, right? How does it actually work from step one to the end to see if a person is in that process, and what does it cost, right? And is this a charge that is put on the property owner every time an inspection comes out? They have to pay this fee every time this person comes out. Is that an extra cost that's put on them, right? What are those types of protections for property owners that have the financial hardship? What is the is there opportunities to create some type of offset? And I think I said this before, for the people that are owning these homes, because all of these costs are going to add up, right? And when you get to the place where all these costs are add up, as a person that owns a home or multiple homes and that's renting, I'm going to step back and say, well, I don't really want to be paying all this money, so I'm going to just put in a notice to reclaim my property back. Right? And so we have another person that's displaced. Or do I have to pay the cost to put this person into a hotel while I get all of these repairs done? And if I don't have the finances to do all these repairs done or get all these repairs done, then how do I keep my finances intact? Well, maybe I'll just put a lease in place. I had this discussion earlier. Put a lease in place that these people can only be in here for a certain amount of time. And then when my certificate is up for renewal, I don't have to put anybody back in that house. I don't have to worry about it. So now we got people who are displaced still, again.
Well, I think those are good questions. I actually think we have a lot of that information already. Fortunately, other cities have led the way when it comes to lead testing, so we have good information about how other cities have implemented a similar program, and we have good data from them about the program and potential ramifications and cost. And so maybe we can share some of that. And then we also have some data that we collected and information we collected, especially from other cities, on impact during our task force that we had a couple years ago. So we can share that information as well and make sure that the commission has that backdrop and that background information. And then some of the other questions related to, cost and support. I know that you all have talked about some ideas for that as well and what that would look like. So I think those are all good questions, and I know we've been having this conversation for a long time, and some of us were a part of those conversations over the last several years. So sharing all of that information I think would be helpful, both with this body but also with the public.
We will do that.
Yeah. I'll go to Commissioner Isasi, or let's go Commissioner Perdue and then Isasi.
Good morning. So I think after 2 weeks ago, the last meeting, the sentiment really was we didn't want to sit on this for another year or two. We really wanted to take some action. As you mentioned, 2 weeks ago, really was a high-level overview, lots of great discussion, and then kind of seeing the proposed language brings up a lot more questions around what would this look like in practice, those intended and unintended consequences, to make sure that we're prepared. I wonder if there is a happy median saying we need to take action on this, and maybe as is might not be the full path forward. Might there be an option to administratively begin to implement some of these changes, but without some of the the punitive consequences. So for example, on slide 14, there's examples of certificates of compliance might be suspended. What if we did almost like a study, right? So began to administer it through the dust sampling, track the data to see how this impacts owners, what the cost will look like for us, but then maybe phase in some of the proposals around suspensions and kind of other consequences if things aren't up to stuff. So those are some ideas I have. I mean, I still really want to move forward with this and recognize the need to balance intended and unintended consequences for families as well as for property owners. So those are kind of some of my thoughts and questions, and looking forward to continue the conversation, but just wonder is there a path forward that can meet those two requirements of taking action forward without maybe in its entirety, because we want to be cautious and careful.
Mayor.
So you're mostly thinking about the compliance component and coming alongside more of a supporter than a enforcer? However, the actual testing and finding out that a home is safe for kids is still a priority. So that's what it's good feedback. City Manager?
We cannot write this ordinance on the dais and add or subtract at this point. I would not feel comfortable doing that for public hearing. So we either are going to move forward with the language that we have today for public hearing that is both publicly being shared today, but as Ms. Bohach has said, has been, except for the rental property maintenance code, I think the section, chapter 12, the lead portion was shared with those stakeholder groups and has been shared with members of this dais prior to today. So again, if the concern is about the implementation, I would rather not start a public process on a hearing of an ordinance that was majority supported last week, now questioned this week, and it just sends the community, we have enough issues that we're focusing on. I would rather come back and address all the issues so we know what version of the ordinance we are putting forward so that the public is really clear on what this commission wants to do.
Well, I appreciate that, City Manager, but I am personally, I'm supportive of moving forward with the public hearing with what is before us and hearing from the community and being able to answer the questions posed. I actually think that some of the questions can be answered pretty clearly and directly based on all the work that's already been done over the last several years. And having a public hearing gives an opportunity for others in the community to be heard. And then we as a body can take into consideration that feedback and decide when to move forward and if we want to make amendments. And so to me, this is a first step, is moving forward with the public hearing, and it's a critical step to change the ordinance. So I'm still supportive, moving forward, having a public hearing, hearing from the community, and then making a decision. I'm going to go to Commissioner Isasi first, Commissioner, and then I'll come back to you.
Thank you, Mayor. Thanks for the presentation. My comment was going to be, the resolution in front of us is to schedule a public hearing. And so I want to keep the main thing. And this is the process in front of us. I think we've had some discussions with some other issues about, not necessarily related to this issue, but around public safety. We need to have, I believe, a public hearing to move that process forward. I think that's appropriate. People can share. Individuals have reached out to me as well, and I'm committed to connecting with anybody who would like to talk to me individually. Either a homeowner, rental property association. I'm committed to that, but I also think let's focus on what's in front of us. And I am committed to the public hearing. I shared some of my sentiments of, what I was supportive of last week. City Manager, I always appreciate you saying that. That hasn't changed for me, so I am prepared to vote yes on this resolution to schedule the public hearing. Thank you.
Thanks, Commissioner. Commissioner O'Connor, and then Commissioner Robbins, did you have any comments? And then I'll
Thank you, Mayor.
call the question.
I appreciate the City Manager, your sentiment around, we're not going to figure out the nuance of drastic policy change at the dais, but I appreciate the mayor's sentiment that, this is public hearing one. If we need to have a second public hearing, we can do that too. So I see no harm in having a public hearing. We should be receptive to feedback. We're continuing to hear from folks who will be impacted on this issue from both sides of, both property owners and tenants. And, I'm perfectly fine having a public hearing, getting some feedback. We don't have it scheduled for an ordinance adoption. Let's hear the feedback and be willing to work towards something. And again, I too, I want to do this, figure out how we get to something that we can all agree to and put forth the best public policy for the city.
Mayor, could I just note that Mr. Hahn and then Mr. Jordan, our Assistant Code Compliance Director, we have also been just to make sure that people know, whether it's, groups or individuals who want to understand this better or understand the language, understand what the proposed process is. They've been seeking us out, we've been meeting with them, and we're happy to continue to do so.
Great, thanks. Commissioner Robbins, another thing, I will call the question.
Yeah, thank you again for this information. I think to Madam Mayor's point, there's a lot of questions, but I think there maybe are less than we realize because we have answers that just aren't fully transparent with us or with the public yet. And so I just think it would be really important going into this public hearing, which I am supportive of, to have that information readily available to the public so that when people show up to make comments, they're informed on really what the unintended and intended consequences are. And I know I mentioned that during the last meeting too, that there's been many other communities who have enacted ordinances like this. And so I would be really surprised if there weren't some indications of what the impacts were. So that's really all the comment I want to make.
Yeah, thank you, Commissioner. Appreciate that. All right, with that, I'll call the question. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? It carries. All right, next that will take us to a resolution setting February 21 as the date to consider amendments to the zoning ordinance section 5.8.05 for the floodplain overlay district in compliance with the National Flood Insurance Program regulations. Can I get a motion?
Moved.
Support. All right, moved and supported. Again, Commissioners, this is something we've talked about. We knew this was coming. Second step process in what was started last month. So we'll start with Ms. Turkelson. We'll see if our city engineer has anything else to add, and then I'll call the question on this. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mayor. Good morning, Commission. I don't know that I have a whole lot to add. I think that the red line version perhaps looks a little more dramatic than this actually is in terms of the scope of the zoning changes. Clearly, we are trying to maintain compliance with the program, the flood insurance program. The actual land use regulations, the restrictions, are not getting any more strict or lessening through this process. So it's simply references and such that are needing updating to maintain that compliance. And I have smart colleagues here too if there's more detail that's needed on that.
Great, thanks. Commissioners, any questions or comments? All right, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, it carries. All right, I think I'll call the question to go into executive session. Get that out of the way before we go to the briefings. Can I get a motion to go in executive session? Again, this will be for 3 legal opinions, and we'll meet down in the law library.
So moved.
Support.
Moved and supported. This is a voice vote. Commissioner Perdue? Commissioner Eastasi?
Yes.
O'Connor?
Yes.
Moody?
Yes.
Robbins?
Yes.
And Knight?
Yes.
Okay, and I'm a yes. Thank you, Commissioners. All right, so we have 2 presentations. One is an update for our annual economic impact report. So we'll have Mr. Gracia, our Director of our Economic Development Department, share this information with us, and then we'll have an update from Ms. Turkelson on our community master plan. Hi, welcome.
Good morning, Mayor, Commissioners, City Manager, City Attorney, Clerk. So this morning we are going to provide, as we do on the regular occasion, our 2022 annual impact report for all the projects that we help administer and support for the last calendar year. So to begin, I want to make sure to introduce and provide credit where it's due to the economic development staff. They're here on to your left, and you can see them on the screen. And it's really important to understand the amount of work and load and detail work that goes into every one of these projects for every memo and public hearing and record keeping and follow-up survey. And so it's important for them. And also, I would say, interdepartmental work across the city to get these projects across the finish line. And so recognizing that economic development team, giving them credit where it is due. as I mentioned about interdepartmental work, and typically we provide this update at the Economic Development Project Team, and we provide a Development Center update, and I think it's, again, another interdepartmental work to talk about the significant dollar amount of construction value that we put through our development efforts. And you can see since 2001, it's $6 billion, but calling attention specifically to approximately the last decade of that growth. You know, obviously there was an exception there in 2020 for reasons beyond our control, but you can see that we've kept up momentum, and actually last year surpassed our 2021 number, which was the third highest. So now we have a new third highest year and development construction value permits through our development center. And again, it's important to talk about that context and the bigger momentum on projects that do take place within the city, because people want to invest here and they elect to do so aside from any economic development incentive. They do it because they know it's the right market to do it, and they need to do it for their employees, for their housing needs, and for their investments. So let's talk a little bit about those investments themselves. So 2022 investments, we have, as you can see at the top, $245 million of investments over 17 projects that our department supported. I want to call attention, we did provide a breakdown by ward and neighborhood of focus, and certainly happy to report that overall we had a 35% increase in overall investment from 2021. But also call attention specifically in those projects in the neighborhoods of focus. So for 2022, 9 of those 17, over half of those projects took place in neighborhoods of focus, and dollar amount wise is $95 million, or about 38% of total investment committed in those projects to those neighborhoods of focus. Now that is aligned directly with our equitable economic development and mobility strategic plan, again driving those development projects in those areas that traditionally hadn't been seen the type of development that perhaps other parts of our city have, but understanding that the city as a whole needs to grow, and we had a great balance across all our wards in 2022. The other important piece related to our total investments is our inclusion plan. So over the last 2 calendar years, we've had full implementation of our inclusion plan, which we report regularly when we bring projects before you to talk about those commitments to those MBE, WBE, and MOBE contractors. And so since inception of January of 21, we've got commitments of $42 million. So $42 million that we are tracking diligently. But most importantly, I want to point out the 218% increase from 2021 to 2022. So now we're in a good stretch here where we have a runway of projects that are under construction, and we're gonna, we're going back and surveying them and asking them, hey, these are commitments, and we'll talk a little about later on. But again, this is important where we're just asking the question, can you commit to, based on our values and our equitable plan, to seeking out minority contractors? We cannot by law require to do so, but we're going to ask you and use our influence to do so. And these are the results. So last year, over $28 million. We have a strong pace of projects even for 2023, and we, now we're in that reporting period, and we'll plan to bring that back to you as well. But again, 218% increase. And then again, as we talked about housing support, in our projects, we've supported, last year 762 new units, and just about half of those are at 80% median area median income and below. So those are projects that have LIHTC support, also projects that have other federal or state support that we're using, as Commissioner O'Connor mentioned earlier, for our capital stack to make sure those projects go. We understand the importance of housing for jobs and investment, and this is one of the ways. We're one of the departments across the city. Community development supports them very much, and planning, obviously, and many others that are making sure that we are trying to provide housing developments as much as true economic development, jobs, and investment. So I'll give you a quick overview here of the jobs, again, perspective on the last 3 years of the jobs impacting wages. And so for 2022, you can see, about a little over 400 and those average wages of $23 an hour. And you may ask your question, well, 2021 was a little bit lower and was much higher, but that also includes a significant downtown project in the Spectrum CTI. That was 1,800 jobs. So a significant investment, significant commitment, and so I want to call that attention. So when you subtract that out, you're still at 625 jobs and roughly $24 an hour. So you're on par year over year with the outcomes of the projects that we're supporting. And certainly another key component is our business neighborhood investments and through our corridor improvement authorities and business improvement districts. And this is truly, again, this money is provided through tax income revenues, similar that we do with a brownfield. And so as we drive investment in those neighborhoods, their tax increment revenues grow, and they're empowered to reinvest that as they wish through their facade programs, public art support, and streetscape enhancements based on their local selected leadership. And so their boards, and you can see last year we had just under $1 million of reinvestment of those revenues. It's a 40% increase from 2021. Now our staff is really, important to making sure that we're facilitating those discussions and ensuring that those investments and those priorities are being utilized as they should. But more importantly, this is the decision of those CIAs and those bids to make those investments. And this is true community business-led investments through the corridor improvement authorities. So again, our largest program that you see on the most regular occasion is our Brownfield Redevelopment Authority and local Brownfield Revolving Fund. And specifically, the success of our Brownfield Redevelopment Authority provides these additional funds to utilize these other programs, which is local Brownfield Redevelopment Authority and these environmental site assessment and grants. Based on when those projects complete full reimbursement or the term is up, we collect for 5 more years on those projects, and then we're able to reinvest. And this gives you a summary where those investments taking place in 2022. So in those LBRF programs, over $2.6 million, and again, the neighborhood of focus, 1.7, that's 65% of that investment back into those neighborhoods of focus. Those environmental site assessment grants, so those are not familiar, and sort of the general public, those are really important for anyone seeking to buy their own property. Before a bank, or if they're buying it cash, we recommend this environmental site assessment to be complete, and this program specifically is tailored to offsetting those costs. And when you do that in a neighborhood of focus, it's 100% of reimbursement. And again, a breakdown where those investments are taking place, and again, 173,000 those environmental site assessment grants, 152 in those neighborhood of focus, which represents 87% of those investments through our environmental site assessment grant. And I know on the regular occasion we're talking about, well, so what are kind of these property taxes, that we have with our projects? Again, gives you a summation of where we are with each of those. But what's important is these are rolling over year after year. So once that investment takes place, that property tax and those income taxes continue to generate, and there's a multiplier effect. But this gives you just a little snapshot. Again, in 2022, a little over $500,000. And where those income tax, property taxes, based on those commitments on each individual project that we assess. So last but not least, there's a lot of questions about how do we know that these projects actually become what ways approved. And so we go back and we look back, and what you see here is a 5-year look back to 2017 to 2021, and we're surveying them, and we're happy to report, and then job creation retention of over 113%, and projects and investment, again, at 114. So these are completed projects. As you understand, some projects will be approved, and it may take a number of years before those projects actually are completed, but we do go back and making sure that those commitments and seeking their confirmation of those investments. And obviously you can see those as you drive around town and see many of those projects that are redeveloping or infill development. So you have a lot of momentum, a lot of important people behind these projects. And I think the best way to give you the perspective of who's behind these projects and where they're taking place is we actually highlighted a few of them in this video. So I'm going to allow this video to speak for itself. And I'll see you in 2.5 minutes.
2022 was a great year for the Grand Rapids Economic Development Office. We've seen great impact across the city, not only in downtown, but truly in every single ward and also in our neighborhoods of focus. And we were happy to report these great investments of over $245 million in 2022.
We're excited to be part of the Crescent neighborhood. We're here at 1359 Plainfield, which is the future home of Lofts on Grove, which will be a 110-unit mixed-use apartment building, along with a small retail commercial piece to it also. So it's a $25 million investment into the neighborhood.
had great success with our inclusion plan. In 2022, we were able to secure over $28 million of support to minority contractors for each of those private development projects.
Lo que queremos aquí hacer en este edificio es traer a los supermercados en el primer piso y en el segundo piso tener oficinas. Esta área es 900 César y Chávez en Grand Rapids. Y frutas y verduras de aquel lado y toda la comida de este lado siga en líneas hacia allá. La panadería va a quedar allá. We're utilizing grants available, and we're also very excited, very happy to work with the city to make this project a reality.
This is where I wanna be, never ever gonna leave, you ain't gonna get it from me,
Overall, the CIAs and the bid have made about $1 million investment in their communities. Most of these went to facade improvement program, some went to streetscape enhancement, and also public arts.
Zero Plus is developing 2017 Eastern, which is located on the corner of Eastern and Burton in Garfield Park neighborhood. The project's total is $3.8 million. It hopefully exceeds expectations for its energy efficiency standards and sets a new standard of development for the community, saying, yes, you can have a mixed income project that meets and doesn't displace people from the community. Yes, you can have a project that is almost net zero. Yes, both of these things can come together and create a space where people can continue to love and grow with their community.
Porque juntos.
Because together.
We are.
We are GR.
So as you can see, those are the people behind those projects. And I think, in front of you, you'll see a summation of what I covered today. And that's simply sort of a handy reference. And we look forward to having a very strong 2023 as well.
Thank you, Mr. Gracia. I will turn to my colleagues to see if they have some questions. Commissioner?
Yes, thank you for that, and great video. Just a definition question on slide 6, when you refer to jobs being retained, what is the definition of retainment?
So, I'm sorry, let me get this up. So jobs that are currently with the project that will remain with the project as basically their baseline for today.
So kind of beyond construction, after construction?
Beyond. So today, if you said you had 50 employees, that would be a 50 employee retention, and then you would look at the new on top of that.
Okay. And then curious, you might not know this off the top of your head, so I appreciate you highlighting the amount of private investment. Curious if we have a comparison number for public investment for kind of the same portfolio of projects.
No, but I can certainly, for the 17 projects specifically. Yeah, slide.
Yeah, looking at 20. Yeah, I'm looking at slide 4, just because you kind of highlighted increases over time and how they're distributed. And so just curious how public investments might compare to that private investment.
Yeah, and when you say public investments, what do you want that to be? All things streets and utilities, or all things just directly related to our project in terms of our incentives?
The incentives piece.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you.
Yep.
That's it.
Thanks. Commissioners, any other questions? Commissioner Sassi?
Oh, I'm sorry.
I'll go. Let's go,
ahead.
Commissioner Sassi, and then Commissioner Knight.
Thank you. Yes, nice video. So you put Creston right there in the front, so thank you for that. I just want to say thank you again. I know you get to stand up here, and I love that there were other members of the team. I know this is very much a team effort, and some of us get to see many of them more, but I just want to say thank you to all of you for your efforts to connect, to answer a lot of different questions that we have, to move things ahead on agendas. It is very much appreciated. So I wanted to say that. I think there's some exciting things to celebrate, and then I always think, like, what else could we be doing, or what else should we be thinking about? And I think there is some movement in this economic development world about, as we look at these statistics, how can we go deeper, more involved? And I think Grand Rapids, we've always kind of led that. How do we measure things in a more holistic way. And so one of my colleagues in my day job, Alyssa Sangali, leads an organization, Northern Initiatives. Many of you are familiar with that. They are a community development financial institution, but they've also received some funding to work with businesses to identify different job quality metrics. So this is sort of, I think, like the next iteration of some of the things that we could be measuring in terms of our economic development impact. And so I'm anxiously, I know they've been interviewing some businesses and other CDFIs. It's something that is important as we think about not only these very large-scale projects and the jobs they're creating and the economic impact they have to the businesses around them, but how could we measure some other aspects? So they would look at things like businesses that were able to offer things like healthcare businesses. We have a lot of businesses who have been actively engaged in the TriShare project at the state level. So I'm not asking for anything to be done. Let me be clear about that after this is truly a briefing, but I'd love to be able to explore that, Mayor. I think we have some really exciting things. And I think also businesses are asking too, how can we even show our greater impact in our neighborhood? So.
Yeah.
Thank you.
It's good feedback. The qualitative metrics, I think, are also important. Commissioner Knight? Any
Sorry,
other?
I said I'll email you the questions I have.
Okay. And everyone is obviously welcome to reach out to Mr. Grassi if they have additional questions or follow-up. I'll add my voice of thanks to the entire team. I know for many of us who've sat around this table as we've seen the creation of corridor improvement districts, it's really, in my opinion, something that we all should be proud of, some of the investment that we're seeing in our neighborhood business districts because of those CIAs. So thank you for all of your work. All right, one final opportunity for comments or questions? Okay, I'm going to close that briefing, and that will take us to our community master plan update. So I will invite Ms. Turkelson up to give us an update on this effort. Hi, welcome.
Thank you. First, I'd like to protest the order of these briefings. Don't have a fancy video to follow. Yeah, we will. Give us time. So thank you for the opportunity this morning to provide you with a very brief update on where we are at with the community master plan. We're a little more bashful in the planning department. I don't have headshots of the team, but I'm very grateful to the dedicated work of Jay Stephan, Leila Islani, and Sarah Atani for their support through this process. So as a quick reminder, a community master plan helps guide the future growth and development of the city. There are opportunities for us to look at topics or important themes to the city, such as transportation, climate mitigation, and those are all themes that the community has told us are important and will also be included through this process. The components of a community master plan include our community profile, who are we, as well as looking for public input to understand the values or the vision for our community. And those combined help create a new plan or new vision that is used to guide the growth and development for our city. We do have a steering committee that is working alongside the department and the consultant, as well as supporting the Planning Commission through their work. That steering committee helps guide some of the public engagement process, serve as a sounding board for us. And we've made great strides and worked very hard to try to find a steering committee that is representative of our community. And so you can see the graph here that you've seen before, for example, of how the steering committee breaks down with race and ethnicity. And I'm very appreciative of their hard work and dedication through this process.
And thank you. And just to make sure people understand the slide, the city of Grand Rapids, the line is the census data. So we have a good comparison between who is on the steering committee and and this is 2020 census data?
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. That's important. This is the timeline for the overall project, obviously very high level. It is a timeline that you've seen before, and I'm pleased to report that we remain on time for the project, getting things done in the time frame that we expected. The red arrows help indicate where significant portions or rounds of engagement will take place for each phase of the project. So the The engagement process itself is divided into 4 rounds that are centered around those key themes. And so as we move through the engagement process, we really start with brainstorming, helping understand where community's at and what's important. And then eventually we'll move into a responsive phase where we provide vision statements and goals and objectives for the community to respond to and provide their feedback on. Here's the timeline of those engagements, which I think is important to call out just so community can anticipate when they would be asked to participate. So we are currently in round 1, which will be the predominant focus for this morning. We move to round 2 in May, and of course we conclude with round 4, which is more of the what I would call the adoption phase, where the draft plans begins to come together and available. And the goal is to conclude the project in the spring of 2024. We are employing a variety of engagement techniques through this process. What we know and what we learned through our pre-planning process back in 2019, as well as through other engagement work that the city has embarked upon, that there isn't one size fits all. So if we truly want to create a plan and a process that is inclusive, then we need to make sure that we're employing a variety of techniques so that community is comfortable participating in ways that that they're comfortable with. And so sometimes that's not attending large group forums or coming to public hearings. Sometimes it's one-on-one interviews where an individual may feel most comfortable participating in answering questions and perhaps divulging personal stories that would help inform what our vision looks like for Grand Rapids. Going back to the specific round 1 of engagement that we are in, this is really intended to serve as an introduction. So there might be individuals who have not participated in a community master planning process. So what is that? Why is it important? Looking to gather insight and feedback and hopefully make a good impression and encourage people to participate as we move forward through this process. Our launch parties are coming up, which is that big kickoff, if you will, from a public-facing perspective. So that will take place the week of February 20th. There is a launch party, one in each ward. They are not ward-specific, so if you live in Ward 1, for example, you could attend a Ward 3 and vice versa. But we wanted to try to make sure that they were conveniently located throughout the community at a time that the steering committee helped identify they thought would be most convenient. And of course, there will also be food provided for those so that they don't have to choose between dinner and attending. These are also family-friendly events. So while there's no separate childcare per se, there will be activities that will help engage the youth. So if I bring my daughter to the event, then I have the opportunity to engage her and help collect her vision and also help her start her civic engagement life. So the Community Connector program is one technique that we are utilizing. We've seen success of it in various other long-range planning work. As part of the contract and request for proposals that we received, you did see that we planned to utilize this model. And this is where we employ community connectors that live and work throughout the community and intended this work to supplement the work that they're already doing. We are also supporting neighborhood organizations in a similar manner. So this morning at Fiscal, you had an agenda item that would help provide some additional funding to support neighborhood organizations through that 4th round or that final round of engagement. Unfortunately, there is an option for people to participate virtually. Not necessarily, don't think of it like a hybrid meeting, but all of the activities and such that would take place through these larger engagement efforts will be available electronically. So if I'm not able to attend the launch party the week of the 20th, for example, I can still complete all of the activities online and have my voice heard and communicated to the planning department for incorporation into this process. So again, just trying to make sure that we are as inclusive and accessible as possible. And that does summarize where we are at to date. You may recall that there are formal report outs throughout this process. So at the end of phase 1, which we estimate to be in about April, we will have the consultant along with perhaps some steering committee members and staff come and provide you a formal report out of how things went relative to the phase 1 of the process. So with that, I'm available for questions.
All right, thank you. I'll start by thanking you for this update. I know I've heard from a number of the steering committee members who are really excited to be working with this consultant, and they feel like things are going really well and are excited about these launch events this month. I know I'll be attending some of them, and I know many of you will be as well. So just want to say thanks to all the steering committee members who've been working hard for over a year. Also want to remind everyone that we do have two planning commissioners also serving on the steering committee. And process-wise, before the final product comes to us, it'll go before the planning commission as well.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah. All right. Questions or comments? All right, Commissioner?
Morning. Might you talk a little bit more, let me find my note, on engagement? So we did approve that item this morning to support some of the neighborhood organizations' engagement. The community connectors, is there compensation there? And I'm curious, of the project budget, do we have a sense of how much of those dollars are allocated to community engagement? I'm assuming there's more outside of just the compensation for the neighborhood organizations.
There is. I don't have the total for you for community engagement of the entire budget for the project offhand. We can certainly break that out. Yes, the community connectors, it is a paid position. Within the scope, it allocated $25,000 for that program or that element that will run through the entire project.
And we've used a similar model with some of our other processes in the past, and it's been really quite successful.
Sure. And then second question, curious if, our last plan was, I think, 2002. Do you have a sense of how much of that plan we successfully implemented?
Yes and no. So we actually received that question quite a bit during the pre-planning phase, what has been done. And one of the lessons learned is that we didn't actually create a dashboard. We will not repeat that error of our ways, so that we will have better tracking through this project. However, we did brainstorm a number of responses that came out of the original or the 2002 master plan. For example, Friends of Grand Rapids Park came out of the Green Grand Rapids plan, which was an extension of the master plan. So we affectionately call it the Tree of Life, and I can certainly share that with you. It's been included in past presentations that help you, that help illustrate how many great projects have come out of that plan.
Yeah, I'd be interested in seeing that if it's not too much trouble.
Yep, absolutely.
Thanks.
Yeah, and thinking about the last 20 years, we've had a number of area-specific plans that have led to zoning changes that have led to really significant investment.
Michigan Street being an obvious one.
Yeah,
for
Michigan
example.
Street, Fulton Street on the west side, the Brick Yacht plan, and everything that's happened in Midtown. So it would be actually good to take a look back and kind of capture all of that work.
Yeah.
So even though we don't have a dashboard, I know many of us have seen the impact of that initial plan.
Yeah, and I think, related to the work that Jeremiah just presented, a lot of that investment, that private investment, can be directly tied to the forethought and the planning work that was done back in '02.
Yeah. Commissioner O'Connor, and then I'll see if anyone else, and then.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you to Kristen and the Planning Department and all those that are volunteering their time to help try to facilitate a great plan for Grand Rapids. And I think it's really interesting looking back, 20 years of a visioning document that, we've certainly, I think, outgrown as a community. And I think you and I have had a couple of conversations where you're like, hey, we're going to bring another zoning change to the city commission. Do you think, it's like it felt like it was like every week for a minute we were making the zoning change, but I think that's just evidence as to why we need a document like this to be that vision, because we've outlived what we've done. I think even without a dashboard, it's been successful, but it's also, we've reached its limitations. And then as we as a community struggle with things, especially like housing, and knowing that there's changes we've recently made and have been making and talking about that have been limitations to creating housing opportunities in our community. And so I'm really hopeful that, once we create this visionary document, there's going to be that subsequent zoning change along with it to allow its facilitation to come to life. I have been a part of a number of housing discussions and conversations, and one of the things like Housing Next and the Affordable Housing Task Force, and I think there's things that we still need to do in the short term before the eventual zoning change is, to me, the most significant part of this at the end. But I feel like we're in this window right now where we still have this incredible need for especially how, I hate to just harp on housing, but it feels like housing is the thing that we all continue to talk about, and we know we need, and I think we'll probably get some information tomorrow about, an even greater need for housing opportunities in our community. And so I'm hopeful. I have a list of ideas that I've kind of amalgamated from conversations we've had over the years, as well as things from the Housing Next that didn't get implemented last time we made a zoning change, that I hope can be considered as part of the master plan dialogue, but also might be considered by our planning department and our planning commission sooner than that, especially as we have this window of opportunity here where we might be able to try a few things before a full-scale zoning happens to try to facilitate some additional housing opportunities, both in terms of the expansion of existing, we have things that exist in our community that might not be maximized to their full potential, as well as opportunities to create new housing units in space. And so I'll be submitting that to you and to the city manager in hopes that that can be incorporated into the master planning discussion, but also might be able to be considered sooner than that as part of maybe a planning commission discussion about things that we can do short term to really boost opportunity. We, City of Grand Rapids ourselves aren't going to create any housing opportunities, but what we can do is we can lay a zoning framework and a land use framework that allows it to happen, and we can work with our partners in economic development to make sure that developers and folks wanting to build and create housing have all the opportunities and tools at their feet so they can do what they do best, and we can sort of get out of the way.
Yeah. Thanks, Commissioner, for bringing that up. I think you are absolutely right. We have over the last several years passed a number of zoning changes, whether it was around corner lots or residential on the main floor in commercial buildings, the accessory dwelling units, and I think it's always prudent to take a look back at that language, see if it spurred the kind of development, especially around housing, that we were hoping. If not, do we need to make some additional changes? One that comes to mind is all the conversations around accessory dwelling units, and I think that is right for us to take a look at and see if we need to make any adjustments in order to spur additional units, especially at the price point that we know that those can be included into properties. So we can follow up on that conversation as well. Commissioner Isasi, and then I'll see if anyone else, and then Commissioner Robbins.
Thank you, Mayor. Thanks, Mr. Golson, for the presentation. And we know that City Manager Washington is not going to let this note pass by without doing a dashboard on this round. So we know that's the one. I think that was the first thing he showed me when I sat down. He's like, here's all my data, Commissioner. So we're going to have that. I feel confident about that. I agree. I want to say, yes, thank you to all those that have volunteered their time and energy, and the connectors. I think those are important conversations. They have different levels of engagement. One of the things I think I had shared some feedback in the past with you, and I think anytime you put together 47 people in a group, you're going to have difference of opinions, right? So can you talk a little bit, I have one shameless plug, but can you talk a little bit about how we're evaluating their experience, engaging with the city, and feedback that they can provide, because we have them sort of in this time frame. And then, and I know you're doing that. And then how can we keep some of these folks connected? So my shameless plug is around, I know some of these individuals are serving on other, bodies, obviously some folks from the Planning Commission, but those that aren't, I'd love to make sure that we just get them looped into some of our opportunities, Mayor, and to serve in different ways, because they've showed that interest. So thank you.
Great point.
Thank you, Commissioner. I'll start with your last question. You're right. I mean, oftentimes these large-scale planning efforts do help educate and motivate people to become more involved. It builds capacity within neighborhoods and interest and maybe a level of understanding about how serving on certain boards and commissions, like the Planning Commission, for example, is an opportunity to be directly engaged in that growth and development. I will think through how we can make sure that those are maybe more front and center as we move through this process. In terms of how we're evaluating our both our community, our steering committee members, is we do provide feedback forms at the end of every steering committee meeting. We have an online form that we do send to them through follow-up. We are constantly providing that follow-up about here's what we heard, here's the next steps. And also, tell us what you thought about the meeting. Was it productive? Was it a good use of your time? And at the end of every single form, we ask, would you like to meet with us? And if yes, please leave us your email and we will reach out. And we've done that, especially in the beginning where we had community members that maybe weren't as confident in what their role was, and had some constructive criticism for us about the use of their time and the topics that we were providing. And so we met with those individuals, it's kind of the one-on-one, and we listened, and we were able to make the adjustments to make sure that it is a good use of their time, because it's incredibly important that we respect that. And we'll continue to do that. And also, there is a leadership team, which is 5 members that were selected from the steering committee that will be more, I think, directly engaged with city staff beyond the once-a-month meeting. And so I would expect that steering committee's members, if they have comments or feedback, that might percolate to this to the leadership team that would then reach out to Layla and I.
Great, thanks. Commissioner Robbins?
Yeah, thank
Close
you.
this?
Just one quick question. I know with the recent census data, there's been, some specific demographics age-wise and ethnic-wise that we know are growing faster than others. I know particularly the 25 to 35, I think it is, age demographic is particularly growing a lot. I guess, is there any sort of intentional efforts to make sure that those quicker growing demographics are captured within this process? Because I know 20 years is a long time, and obviously the demographics of our city now are very different than, when this the process was previously conducted. So just curious about sort of more information on those engagement efforts to make sure that, we're capturing everybody's feedback.
Yep, so we do have a variety of ways of reaching out to our youth. We have an individual from the Mayor's Youth Council, and so there are, I think, through those different techniques, and there's a variety of ages, if we're just focusing on age for a moment, a variety of ages that serve both through the community connectors as well as the steering committee. We have an age-friendly division within the long-range planning department to help coordinate with our senior population. So we're very cognizant of who makes up our community and how, and we're willing, and we have set up a structure to try to intentionally make sure we're engaging with the subsets of our community. It feels when you hear the dates of an 2002 plan being the last time. I mean, the reality is we've achieved, I think, 8 or 9 area-specific plans that were long-range planning work, maybe hyper-focused on a specific geographic area, but we do have routine updates to that plan. They just don't always get the same level of attention as what the community master plan does. It doesn't have the same broader interest, of course, but we do monitor those demographics, and ideally we have a plan that is able to grow with our community as it changes, that it's not so specific to the time frame that we're developing the plan, that it has longevity. And I think we did a really good job of that in 2002, knowing that we haven't really had a critical need to update the large plan until very recently, where we started experiencing some of those pinch points where, it's not quite working, perhaps it's outlived its useful life.
Thank you.
Question. Thank you. All right, I'll give the city manager final comment, and then we'll close this. And commissioners, I'll see you downstairs in the law library.
Thank you, Mayor. I want to thank the staff for all the briefings this morning from Community Development, Economic Development, and our Planning Department. But specifically, I think when we speak about our comprehensive plan moving forward and what we've done in the past through 2002, I think it's important to reflect on the fact that we have done a lot of updates over the years with area-specific planning, and unlike other communities where you do the big plan and you don't do another one until another 15, 20 years down the road, we have done a lot. And some of them are not just geographically limited to a neighborhood, like the traffic plan and the bicycle action plan. Those are things that affect mobility throughout our community, and the things that we've done around sustainability and other things that are non-geographic. So I want, as we talk about the need to move forward, we have been doing a lot of micro planning, I would say, but this gives us a chance to do it more holistically.
Yeah, thank you. I think that's an excellent point, and it's an opportunity to pull all those together, the area-specific plans and the economic development and mobility and parks and trails. So this really is an opportunity to really bring all of that together under a holistic, updated master plan. So with that, commissioners, we'll end Committee of the Whole. As I said, let's go into executive session down in the law library, and then some of you will be back up here for public safety at 12:30.